my clicker will work. All right, great. All right, so you may have heard something in the news the last few months about a conflict in a place called Israel or Palestine. There's two things you may not know about that area. One is that there is a Palestinian Lutheran pastor in South Dakota, of all places, South Dakota. Nabil Noor is an LCMS pastor in South Dakota, and he's the LCMS vice president for the Great Plains region. And we'll touch a little on his story. So he's the one who wrote the packet that we have, and he sent it out to various people, including District President Turner, who he's good friends with. And President Turner said, "Here, send this out. This will be useful as you're discussing it, because obviously, as a Palestinian Lutheran, he's got a unique perspective on things compared to what you're hearing on either side or any side of the news." And a brief biography, and there's some of that in the background on the packet too. So he was born in Nazareth, which he'll joke about. Yeah. How many other Lutheran pastors do you know born in Nazareth? But then they moved to Haifa when he was 3, and there they lived on the slopes of Mount Carmel, which is where Elijah hid from Jezebel. But he immigrated to the United States when he was 16 and became a naturalized citizen. And he underwent adult instruction in the Lutheran faith. He was, I'm remembering right, Catholic-ish while he was in Palestine. But then he, met and married a Lutheran, and that's how that happened. And he says also then he says he's an Arab by nationality, a Palestinian by race, and a Christian by grace. And that, I think, kind of will help understand and define some of how this works too. All right, yep, and this is a repeat. Again, so he migrated when he was 16 in 1972. He's fluent in Arabic and Hebrew and English. Again, they lived in an area they lived in. They were the only Arab family among 10,000 Jewish people. Had many Jewish friends and neighbors, often visited each other's homes. Most of his life was happy. So, and again, as we're talking about this, here's a map that helps us kind of understand the areas. I zoomed in a bit so I cut off the bottom southern part of Israel, but a lot of that stuff that isn't under conflict, so it's not as. So the whole outline of Israel is this area, but the Palestinians now control Gaza, which is the Gaza Strip, which is this area right here. You can see it's bordered by Egypt and then Israel, but then most Palestinians actually live in this area that's called the West Bank. Why is it called that? Because it's at the west bank of the Jordan River. And that includes some other areas that we'll touch on. And then of course you get Jerusalem, which is a divided city and source of conflict. Do I get into the others part of that? And of course, remembering, we talked some about this as we went through both the history of the Old Testament and the history of Christianity a year or two ago. But so after Jesus' day, when the Romans control this whole area, Romans destroy Jerusalem in 70 AD and reconquer and destroy it again also sometime in the mid-100s AD. And by that point then, most, if not all, Jews are gone from Israel. Some move back over time, but the Romans kick them all out of this area, and of course then other people come in. And then we get in 600 and 700 ADs is when Islam arises, and they start taking over. But they're actually, in general, treated in some ways treated the Jews better than the later Crusaders would. And so there were still Jews around in the Holy Land, but they were scattered all over the place. And then the Crusades came in and reconquered Jerusalem. They kicked everyone who wasn't a Christian out. Muslims reconquered it, went back and forth for a while, and it was a big mess. And then it was under Muslim control for a while until the British conquered it, and it was a British colony. And then in 1948, after World War II, after the Holocaust, everyone said, well, the Jews need a homeland, so they should go back to where they are. But of course, the problem is we have these people who were already there. And they can trace their lineage back centuries, just like the Jews could trace their lineage back centuries and claim on the land. And so the Bible study will mention later, too, that it's the fact that it's, for both of those religions, it's the land that's important that creates this source of conflict, especially because you've got the Temple Mount, which is where the temples, first and second temples were for Judaism, were very important. But that's also where the Dome of the Rock is, which is the third holiest site in Islam. And so you can't rebuild the temple without removing the Dome of the Rock. And so everyone claims that, and it's a big mess. And then there's Christians around too, but even the Christians don't always get along with each other, let alone with other people. So that's kind of a short discussion there of what that is. And then my clicker's not advancing, Norm. Can you? Still not. I don't know, maybe I hit something here when I was doing when in doubt, let's turn it off and turn it on. Technology is great when it works. See this doing? Nope. Okay, that did that. That's great. Okay. All right. There we go. So, there are two things you don't necessarily know. First off, you didn't know there was you probably didn't know. Who knew there was a Palestinian Lutheran pastor in the LCMS? Okay, Mark did. Great. All right, so there's a Palestinian Lutheran pastor in the United States who's LCMS and, vice president of our region, the Great Plains region. Second thing you might not know is that there are Lutherans in Palestine. They tend to be connected with the Lutheran World Federation, so founded by more Scandinavians, and so they're tend to be more connected with that, which means they're connected more with the ELCA than with us, than with the LCMS, and so there's some things there. But this is the Evangelical Lutheran Christmas Church in Bethlehem. And you can see, Lutheran Christian Church International Center, Bethlehem. So there are, if I remember right from double checking, there were 6 churches in the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Jordan and the Holy Land is the name of their denomination. And so this is their nativity scene this year. They've got a baby Jesus and all the other things, but it's in rubble because of what's going on there. Yeah, and they set out a thing in November when, conflict was still early, but that they were canceling or at least scaling down their Christmas celebration, because normally, of course, Christmas, there's thousands, people try and flock to Bethlehem and Nazareth, and tourists from all over the world to come and see where Jesus was born and Jesus lived. But and so all the churches, not just the Lutheran ones, all the churches are usually make a big deal out of Christmas. But they're saying no. So the patriarchs and heads of churches in Jerusalem statement on the celebration of Advent and Christmas in the midst of war. And so religious leaders of all Christian denominations announced their decision to abstain from any joyous Christmas celebration this year in the face of the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And their praise for peace. They live in fear due to decreasing freedom of speech, Social media, increased violence and restriction of movement. Again, even if the fighting's in Gaza, they're restricting movement in the West Bank even more than usual. And so prayer has become one of the only safe outlets for our church to express our emotions, our laments, and our yearning for peace. Lift up prayers for the 800 to 1,000 Christians who remain in Gaza, huddled in the churches, uncertain of future. So, all right, any questions thus far?
Israel's been a problem ever since God chose his people.
Right, yeah. Yeah, God could have chosen a people that were in a more isolated place, that isn't a source of conflict as much. But yeah, I mean, we saw that throughout. When we looked through the Old Testament and looked at the prophets, Israel's right in the middle of all these great empires, so they tend to get trampled on as Egypt expands north, or Babylon and Assyria expand west, or then Greece and Rome expand eastward. That they're just caught in the middle a lot of times. Yeah, I think I can't remember where I read it. There's every so often, after some sort of conflict like this, the Jewish people may joke, okay, God, we've been your chosen people long enough. Please choose someone else. But yeah, no. So it's been a source of conflict for a while, and continues to be that way. All right. All right, so now kind of getting into this Bible study part from back to more to Pastor Noor. So his view on the conflict and why it's happening and what's going on is that context is king, culture is queen, and Christ is the center. And so understanding those things are there, that every conflict has in its beginning the heart of man, and the heart of man is a cesspool of hell. That Jesus said, out of the heart comes all wickedness and evil. So ultimately, what's the source of conflict in the Middle East? It's sin, especially the sinfulness of human beings, the sinfulness of people who are trying to grab power, trying to selfishly grab things for themselves, and that kind of thing. All right. And in Genesis 6, when we hear the story of the flood, he said, it's described that the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And the emphasis is added there. Why? Because the word translated in Hebrew is Hamas. Now, he notes that he's not sure of an actual linguistic connection, but it seems to kind of make sense. So first time in Genesis 6, so describing how bad things are before the flood. It's the first time we hear that Hebrew word. It means wicked, evil, wrongdoing, cruelty, damage, unrighteousness, violence. And that word appears 69 times in the Hebrew Scriptures in noun or verb form. But again, of course, we've been hearing about Hamas elsewhere, but it's used by the Palestinian Islamic Terrorist Organization, but it's an acronym in Arabic for Harakat al-Mukawana al-Islam, the Islamic Resistance Movement. So again, a one-to-one correlation is probably can't be drawn, but it's interesting to note. He thought it was interesting to note that connection, that Hamas in Hebrew means violent, and and that's what they do. And every so often, I mean, there's some loan words and some connections just because these languages are arising from the same spot, and so you've got some words and concepts that connect between Arabic and Hebrew. But all right, so again, like the Hebrew words, so the terrorist organization is not interested in peace, but in evil, mayhem, murder, and violence. All right, so, and then the packet you have.
This is from this guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. All right, and there's a whole mess of other Bible passages if you look there for where that word violence is used in the Old Testament. But, all right. So ultimately, the source of conflict is sin, and people who then want to use violence in order to get what they want, to get what they think is theirs. But then, why do people think it's theirs? Well, if you remember Genesis 12, so Genesis 12 is the first call of Abraham, or Abram as he's known in the early part of the narrative. So after Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel, people say we're going to build our way up to God. God says not so fast. I'm going to scatter you around the earth and you're all going to speak different languages. But then God picks Abraham and calls him and says, I'm going to make you a nation. I'm going to make you great. And he gives Abram 7 promises, which is, of course, the number of completion, number of God used in the scriptures. And so throughout that phrase, throughout that time, there's 7 promises. What are those promises? So this is God speaking to Abram, says, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. You will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse whoever curses you. And all the people of the earth will be blessed through you. All right, remember those promises? And so, again, some of these reflect back to how the promises God made to Adam and Eve. And so, and these are then ultimately, fulfilled somewhat in the people of Israel, but also then fulfilled ultimately in Jesus. Why, how are all the people of the world blessed through Abraham and his descendants? Well, it's ultimately pointing to Jesus and what he's done for us. But, all right. But then, of course, sin enters the picture. It's always there. And we get Genesis 16, 1 through 6. Could someone read this for us?
Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, Behold, now the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. And Sarah said to Abram, May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me. And Abram said to Sarai, Behold, your servant is in your power, do to her as you please. And Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her.
All right. So, what do we learn from this story? What's going on here?
If God says something's going to happen, don't try and do it yourself.
Right. God says it's going to happen. Don't try and force the issue. Because again, how does the Tower of Babel? We're going to make a great name for ourselves, and God says not so fast. And so I'm going to make a great nation by picking this guy. Not only that, why is it? How are we going to prove that it's God doing it? What does God like to start with? Sinners. Well, what does he start with when he makes things, Gary? Beginning. What did God make everything out of? Nothing. So, if you were going to make a great nation, would you start with a man and a woman who don't have any kids and are too old to have kids? No. This is we'd start with young couple that's going to have a flock of kids, and easier to make a great nation that way. But is that how God works? No. But He tells them to be patient. I'm thinking this has been a decade, if I'm remembering right, from Genesis 12 to Genesis 16. So, we're waiting, God. This isn't going to work. But we know how biology works. We're too old. This is not going to work. And so they say, well, wait a minute. I've got this servant. Let's see how, see how this works. But of course.
Probably was a practice.
Oh, yeah, definitely, yeah. Well, I mean, and we see that with Abraham's grandson. With not because Jacob has 12 sons, but that's not just Leah and Rachel. They're servants too.
Well, back in that culture, having children was a blessing or a big deal.
Oh, exactly. Yes.
They really felt left out.
Right. Yeah. If you have children, you're blessed. If you don't have children, you're not blessed. And so again, I'm blessed. You are blessed. You will be blessed. People will be blessed through you. But you don't have kids. What's going on? So yeah. So they come up with this plan. What they think is going to happen happens, but then they, when in doubt, you have to deal with unintended consequences. And so we get Hagar trying to step out of her place. Well, I'm the servant, but I got the master's kid growing in me, so I must be better than my mistress. You've got Sarai, who's wondering why her servant's trying to, looking at her with contempt, and you've got Abram stuck between these two women. So, yeah. So again, neither Abraham nor Sarah were patient for God's promise to come to fruition in her fallen state as a sinner. When in doubt, it's sin. Sarai is moved to give Abram, because their names aren't changed yet by this point, her maidservant Hagar to father a child with her. Yeah, when you mess with God's plan, you're swimming in mud and bring about disaster. Despite our sinful impatience, God uses everything for our good and His glory. Now let's see if I get this. So again, we can compare Sarah and Hagar here. Again, Hagar is the slave girl. Sarah is the free wife. Son is born Ishmael, which means God hears. Because I didn't include it on the PowerPoint because I wasn't sure how far we'd get, but later, so Hagar gets kicked. Sarah kicks Hagar out, banishes her. Well, then, God's watching over her because what the promise was to Abraham that his descendants would be a great nation. Well, now you've got this extra descendant, and so Hagar gets some promises. It's actually kind of neat. Hagar is the first person to give God a name. God shares His name with other people, but Hagar is the first one to give God a name and says, "Yes, you are the God who sees," because God sees her when she's run away out into the desert, waiting to die. So that's why Ishmael means God hears. Isaac is born later on. And of course, his name means laughter, because Sarah still isn't quite trusting God's promise. Wait a minute. What do you mean that I'm going to have a kid? This isn't going to work. And so both Ishmael and Isaac have promises from God. And then the Arabs or Ishmaelites are descended from Hagar and Ishmael, and the Jews are descended from Sarah and Isaac. All right?
Oh boy.
Yeah, and so that, we're about towards where I wrapped up the PowerPoint because I wasn't quite sure how far we'd get. And these are at the end of your packet. Just kind of your helpful reminder of the genealogy of Jacob. But yeah, here again. So Jacob, Abraham's grandson, Leah and Rachel. But you've also got Zilpah and Bilhah. Got servants having sons that get connected there too. And of course, then, what happens? Well, King Saul's a Benjaminite, but the promises end up going through Judah. Not the firstborn, not, he of the coat of many colors, Joseph, and not the youngest Benjamin, but through Judah, all the way down. But then you get and Levi, third sons, priests, Levites, so you get Moses and Aaron and all them there. All right, and so again, here are some of the things you can get from Ishmael, if you kind of take out the Hebrew letters here. So you have a yod, the Y sound, that means kind of first letter in hand. Shin means consume, destroy, and Mem, nations. So again, his hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him. So Ishmael's, born to be in conflict with people, but some of it's everyone else against him. So then Ayin, see is from the Hebrew word for see, because he's a God who sees, and then you get El, Ishmael. If you look at the Old Testament name, the Hebrew names, if there's an El in it, that's talking about God, Elohim. So one of the names of God. And so we have that in Ishmael too. And then, again, if we're looking at Abraham's genealogy, so you've got Abraham and Sarah, of Isaac. Isaac marries Rebekah, then he gets Jacob and Esau, and we get Jacob and Esau, which again, brothers get along super well, and so do their descendants. We talk, and the tribes there. And then Ishmael has the children that he has that are named here. And then we get, after Sarah dies, and Hagar is long gone by that point too, then Abraham has another wife and has some more kids. Again, some names we might see familiar to some other things. So, all right. Looks like the brass is getting ready to warm up, and so we'll stop here and we'll keep going on this same kind of ideas, same thing next week. But again, kind of just partly a reminder that things are more complicated than sometimes people will make it seem. In terms, and that conflicts have roots in history, and so they're not always easy to solve. And also why then we pray for peace there for all.
It goes back to Adam and Eve.
Goes back to Adam and Eve, right?
They sinned, and then all of this came from that.
Right, they just hadn't eaten that fruit. But, all right. Well, thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you next week.